You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. Today with me is Robert Charles, and today's show is Reb and Rob on truth and history. Before I turn it over to Bobby, I just want to remind folks, if you haven't heard yet about the Amac News App, I am so excited to speak to you about this. Very proud of what we're doing here at AMAC. We are working on getting out the news and the truth to you. And what we've done is we've put together a very easy to download on your smartphone news app. And what I love about this news app is that you're not going to be bombarded with ads. I talk to a lot of people in group texts, and often we forward one another a really good article that we find. And when I have to go to that article, sometimes I have to pay to read the article, or when I find the article, I lose it because I've got so many pop-up ads. You're not going to have that with AMAC News. You're going to get news on the go. You can set up notifications to receive information. We will notify you when something breaking comes in, something very important. But the news there is not what you're going to see in mainstream media. And Bobby, you've done so much work with AMAC. You continue to be a major contributor. And actually, some of the topics that I want to talk to you about are coming right out of the great articles that you've been churning out, putting up on our website. So I want to encourage people, go to our website. You're going to get a whole bunch of information, not just on the things that Bobby and I are here to talk to you about today, but also on all kinds of things, AMAC's key stance on the issues and member benefits. There's just more there than you can, it'll take you time to go through it all, but it's good stuff. So the AMAC News App, go to your app store, search AMAC Inc. You'll see a red icon. Click on that red icon. It'll upload or download to your phone. And right away, you can get the news right on your smartphone. So, Bobby, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you. And, I'll just remind people, one of the things about AMAC and that app, Rebecca, is that we're actually sometimes ahead of the news. That sounds a little crazy, but, the pieces that we've been writing are sometimes anticipatory, whether it's crime in the streets, or whether it's an emerging legislative issue, or maybe something we've heard behind the scenes that something's going to happen. So I would encourage people to go to the app, because you not only get the news as it is, but sometimes you get a little bit of a sneak peek about where the news is headed. And I think AMAC does that in a way that's better than almost anyone out there.
Well, thank you. I agree. And it's kudos to all of our amazing writers and folks that are paying attention and doing the work and digging in and getting to the truth. We're going to put the link right up here on this page, so you can go ahead and click that link. And just very excited. Would love to hear feedback. So certainly don't be afraid to join. You don't have to be even a member. This is open to the public, so we're encouraging people. We are just so focused on really getting the truth out to the American people. Now, Bobby, you and I have been talking. We are living in such challenging times today. There's so much for us to talk about, but the challenges seem to be multiplying. And as I've said, you've written extensively on constitutional, legislative, and national security issues, and you've spent so much of your time in these areas. So these pieces I mentioned earlier, they are on the amac.us website. I want to talk about honoring our police. There's a lot that we can talk about today. I think folks are relieved to some extent to see that justice was served. But at the same time, I'm very concerned about the future of law and order in our country. So I'd like to touch on that. Understanding the stakes in Afghanistan. Boy, this is a great article that you put out. And Bobby, people are not familiar, I think. Some of us are so busy with our lives, we're not understanding how the decisions that we're making today that affect our relationship overseas, what that means for America in the future. And then, of course, our Second Amendment rights. I mean, AMAC members really stand for their gun rights. And we've got a lot of gun laws on the books. So I want to talk about why we think the Biden administration is pushing even further. Very, very scary times here in America. So let me just start right off the bat with what we're dealing with over in Afghanistan. If I could, I just want to turn it over to you because there is definitely some concern, in my opinion, uh, with the decision that the Biden administration has made to pull out of Afghanistan. And one of my major concerns is, well, first of all, what will happen if we do that? We've lost over 3,500 people, okay, and that includes folks that have died in operations in support of the war, not just in combat. But when you look at that 3,500, you think, was that all in vain? And I'm also concerned that if our troops are pulled out entirely, that we're leaving without any kind of a peace treaty or any kind of a real end game, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that this is likely going to embolden the Taliban to take over the country again. So, what are your thoughts on the administration's decision to pull out?
Yeah. So let me just say all three of your topics are as topical as it gets, and people listening will hear things that they won't hear anywhere else. So let's start with Afghanistan. As you know, Rebecca, but some people may not, when I was appointed as an assistant secretary of state, my primary mission, or one of my two primary missions, was to set up all of the police training in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And so, having been in those countries and having seen what it takes to create or begin the process of self-determination and law and order in a place which has really not had it, was really overrun by warlords and drug trafficking. You have to understand that difficult tasks take a long time. You know, post World War II, we spent a long time suppressing a communist infiltration and frankly communist efforts to take over the Philippines. We were forever in South Korea and in Germany and in Japan, and we have bases all over the world. And part of that is that you have to keep a finger in the dike. That you can't pull it out, or a lot of things happen all at once, which are bad. So my concern, and I'll be very frank about it, is that having set up the police training over in Afghanistan, having spent time, and as you know, I'm also, it was 10 years naval intelligence. I spent time looking at these issues closely. I have a lot of friends who spent time over there. We had American civilians killed over there when I was running operations. And the bottom line is we have to protect our gains, consolidate gains, help reinforce peace around the world. Let me give you the prototype for all this. We did a very similar thing in terms of helping Colombia stabilize their situation. They came up with a peace agreement. The FARC and the ELN demobilized. Those were the terrorist groups. In Afghanistan, what Trump was doing, and you can say, well, he didn't do it fast enough, or he didn't do it comprehensively enough, or he should have brought the Afghan government in earlier. All those are certainly, critics are a dime a dozen. And as Theodore Roosevelt taught us, you know, it's the man in the arena that counts. Okay. And so what we were doing in Afghanistan, both the military, the civilian at the State Department, law enforcement support as well, and with President Trump, is we were trying to get to an agreement. Why? Because if you don't have a combination of a status forces agreement and a peace agreement, you've essentially left the door wide open to not just the Taliban, but we know for a fact that ISIS would like to come in there, Al Qaeda would like to come in there. And what else do we know? We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We all had friends that we had a very traumatic sort of time and I think it's ironic that the president would pull everything out on that date. That's not the date to pull things out. That's the date to put things in. This is the date to understand that America has an enormous interest in keeping stability in a lot of places in the world, but Afghanistan was the power projection point for me. So if we want Taliban and ISIS and Al Qaeda in place, we really should stay engaged there. That's what President Trump was doing. He was saying, we will pull out, but we will pull out conditional, not on a date.
Right. And I think our CIA director, William Burns, I just want to mention, I just heard recently and read again that our CIA director told lawmakers just last week that the departure of American troops will leave a significant risk of terrorism in the region. So when the time comes for the U.S. To withdraw, I think that our ability to sort of react to any type of threat is going to diminish. And I think that that's a fact. You know, and also, Bobby, the Afghanistan police force has had a long history of corruption and abuse and abuse rights against women. I'm concerned about the women and children. If in fact Al Qaeda, Taliban is in there, we are going to see terrible, atrocities. The Afghanistan police have attacked and killed U.S. people and other police officers and their very own people. I think
Well,
that
it's actually the warlord. I mean, we live in a world, Rebecca, where we take all this for granted. We think, well, society will be civil. And the problem is in Afghanistan, the social norms are all tribal, and they are very anti-woman, and they are very anti law and order. Bill Burns and I traveled together to Iraq. Bill Burns is a very straight, level-headed, straight shooter, and I'm thankful he's at the CIA. But I'm just going to tell you right now, what you're saying is going to come up in spades if we don't attend to keeping order. I'm not talking about tens of thousands of troops. I'm talking about tripwire.
Sure.
I'm talking about presence, engagement. You could not be more right, Rebecca. It's sad, but that's the outcome that you precipitate when you pull out rapidly. As someone once said to me, when you pull your fist out of a bucket of water, it fills in real fast behind you.
Yeah, that's right. And Bobby, speaking of law and order, I want to jump over. A lot of people, I think, are sort of it's a sad day in America, isn't it? Because we saw the outcome of the Chauvin trial, and and in my heart, I believe that this was a bad apple. This was a bad police officer. Personally, I say to myself, 9 minutes, almost 10 minutes. It's hard to put myself in that police officer's shoes. It's hard for me to even imagine what he could have been thinking. I don't know what he was thinking. But I am glad to see that justice was served. But I heard so much about people talking that no, this is not enough. We need to protest more. Justice was not served. And I say to myself, how could that be? So there just seems to be such a lack of respect for rule of law by leading Democrats and for the role played in our society by law enforcement. And it seems to really be hitting a high point, Bobby. We're witnessing what you call a culture of perpetual riots, and Democrats are encouraging confrontation and violence. We heard it. Maxine Waters encouraging confrontation. Is this right? And what do we do about it, Bobby? What do we do?
Yeah, so we as a society need to keep our perspective. And what does that mean? It means that we value fairness, we value colorblind approach to law enforement and everything else that we do in society, whether we hire people or give them a shot at education. We should be a society that really sets at the top of the list the idea that equality and liberty together are how we operate. The problem that we have had recently, and the piece that I wrote about the perpetual culture of riots, is that we've lost our perspective, Rebecca. What's happened is that we have failed to understand that most of law enforcement, people who put on a vest in the morning and a gun to go out, protect you, protect me, they have families that they leave at home, and they pray literally that they will get home that night again after having walked into danger's way for us, having put themselves as a buffer between really significant felonious felonies around the country. What we're seeing right now is the worst of all worlds. On the one hand, you have a trial that we trust our justice system, and the trial came out with the right answer. So we're glad about that. That's not the end of the day in terms of our rule of law, but it is the end of the day in that case. The Constitution says that we decide everything on individual cases and controversies. We don't go litigate the future. We talk about what has happened just now, and we resolve it. And then we try to prevent bad things from happening in the future. The problem I have, and the concern that I have, and I did 2 pieces this week about honoring law enforcement, is that people do not understand the heart of law enforcement. Archangel Michael is the protector of law enforcement, and I've always been taken by that, because Archangel Michael is the great protector, the fighter for justice, the protector of the weak. And this is what animates law enforcement officers. I know so many law enforcement officers. I know law enforcement officers, and having worked closely with them, who've lost their best friends, partners in a shootout. I know young people who run to the sound of fire because they're trying to protect innocence. That's what they live for. So what hurts inside me is that, yes, we have unjust shootings that happen. They happen. Color of skin is really almost secondary. They happen as a result of the fact that law enforcement officers intercede in an ongoing crime. But actually, on the numbers, one out of more than 132,000 interactions with the public end up in a shooting. So the numbers are very, very small. And 61% of the American public, in equal numbers, black and white, call for the police, call for help every year. That's a very large number. And typically they're calling to help them get out of a bad situation, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's an intruder, whether it's a suspicious intruder. And these police officers don't hesitate. They don't say, well, I'll think about it.
Sure.
Or give me a minute, I'll get there.
Yeah.
No, they go.
They do
And that's
go.
what
They do go. And my concern is how it really will affect, as you've said, our police officers and police departments in a deeper way. Because I think by and large, our men and women in blue are protecting America. And we're being sold, I feel, that the left, the media, is convincing Americans that, in fact, the majority of Americans are for defunding the police, when in fact that is not the case. That is simply just not true. I think it was on Fox
That's right.
last evening, I saw the mayor of Detroit who said, we don't have issues here because we have a zero tolerance policy. And I love what we see what DeSantis is doing down in Florida, strengthening, trying to build stronger rule of law, especially during times of protest where people are more likely, it seems, sadly, to, especially when it gets dark out at night, to really cause a lot of trouble and wreak havoc. And, this impacts hardworking Americans. So I'm proud of DeSantis for doing that. I think people are really tired of being told that we need to defund our police. We do not need to defund our police. We need police reform. And Donald Trump was for police reform. And why didn't more happen? Why didn't more police reform occur? And why isn't it occurring now? Why is it this whole all or nothing deal?
You have raised some excellent points, Rebecca. And let's get down to it. Good police officers, and 98% of police officers are good, no matter their race, no matter their background. That's what they've done with their lives. They've chosen goodness as the force or the course that they want to pursue with their lives, to take risks for you and me. 98% of them want a police force which is as pure as the driven snow. Human beings are fallen. And so you're going to end up with individuals that are not following the rules, no matter what the rules are. But we also have to review the rules. And one of the things you have said, and I've talked with law enforcement officers closely about, do we do no-knock warrants? What is there a balance here that we need to reset? Because no-knock warrants create uncertainty, and uncertainty can lead to accidents. On the other hand, if you go in with a knock, does that endanger more police officers? Because, in the drug trafficking moment where we've got all these organized, gangs and felons, what's the right balance? And I will tell you something interesting. While every law enforcement officer deserves to have qualified immunity because of the job they undertake, under the risks they undertake it, a lot of law enforcement officers will tell you that reform in the area of something like no-knock warrants may be entirely just. Or do we need to revisit things like what they call the 21-foot rule? We had an event that occurred yesterday where someone pulled a knife, was about to stab two other people. Law enforcement had to pull a firearm. Now, I haven't gone into the depths of that case, but there's a very standard operating procedure. And it is that if someone uses deadly force or pulls deadly force and it looks imminent that that's going to happen, within 21 feet, there is a justification in the rule of law in most states for the use of deadly force or non-deadly force to try to stop that. And you don't want to make a mistake there, right? The 2 lives were probably saved by taking the decision that was taken. So every case in controversy is different, Rebecca, but what we've really got to do is get back to trusting each other, trusting the motivations of law enforcement, understanding that when you get people out in the streets rioting and destroying minority communities and destroying businesses and killing police officers. We lost, I think, 49 police officers last year to gunshots, in trying to get get rule of law reestablished in some location. We need to understand who we are. We are a society premised on the idea that law matters. Law on a piece of paper doesn't mean anything. Law only means something when it is made real by people who take risks to keep it right, to keep the rule of law real. And what I hear you saying, and I think a lot of Americans are saying, is look, we want our law enforcement community to be the best trained, the most honorable. We don't want racism in any department, but for goodness sakes, understand that the whole premise of this country is that self-rule, and that we pick law enforcement officers to help keep that self-rule real. And gosh, I mean, this is how America became America, and we need to be honorable about it. Theodore Roosevelt, one of my great heroes, was the police commissioner in New York before he became a governor and a president. And Theodore Roosevelt was very clear that, in fact, he fired something like 10,000 police officers and then made them go back through a moral test and a physical test. Why? Because rule of law is at the very core of whether our democracy survives. So I would say take a deep breath, take some donuts or something out to your favorite police officer, and remind them that you know that they are good people trying to do a hard job for you.
Yeah. And you wonder, had better training, with better training, would this police officer Chauvin not have stayed on that man's neck for so long? So I mean, who knows? We can speculate all
Yeah.
day long, and that's not what we're really here to do. But I think what we do want to ensure is that you're right, is that law and order here in the United States, we've got to make sure that our police officers are well trained and well supported. I want to move over to the Second Amendment, Bobby. Go ahead. Last word on that.
Well, I was just going to mention something that, yes, last word is, and I won't go through the statistics, although they're in the article that's up online at amac.us now. But people don't realize that the demographics of most communities, Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., is actually reflected in the police departments. So in many of those police departments, you actually have more minority officers than you do even that per capita minority population in that city. And so we need to just get out of the stereotyping business and realize that these law enforcement officers are actually a balance of us. They are us. And so we need to trust ourselves in the form of those we pick for law enforcement. And then we need to honor them, because that really is essential to their being able to do their job well and keep morale high.
That is a very good point. I believe that. On the Second Amendment, we've got a couple of really great pieces up on our website. Your piece this week notes that Democrats, including the president and those in Congress, they're working hard to restrict gun ownership. That the nation is low on ammunition and that this is a right that we must protect. Can you give us a short look at the stakes, Bobby, legislatively, the president's statement, and what is happening nationally?
Yep. So let's do 1, 2, 3 there. Legislatively, the most dangerous bill out there is HR 127. And that bill, if people look at it, they're going to have a shock. I mean, be sitting down when you read that bill. That's what the Democrats want to see push forward. And what does that bill do? It requires that a government-appointed psychologist examine you before you buy a gun. It puts tremendous restrictions on what guns you can get, when you can get them, whether you can get them, mandatory minimum sentences if for some reason you happen to acquire a gun it's absurd. And then it puts in provisions that allow not only red flag kind of laws, but it allows the idea that you can confiscate guns from people if your neighbor thinks that you might be depressed or you might be addicted, or there's a list of things that they can presume about you. So that legislatively, to me, the notion that these are viewed as credible bills is kind of demonstration that we live in a moment of absurdity. These are not bills that would have even been introduced in any of the prior decades of the country. So even at the height of any kind of moment where we would be have been concerned, maybe the 1960s, would never have seen these bills. So that's number one. Number two, you've got a president who leads off his press conference by saying, now everything that I'm going to tell you isn't a restriction on the Second Amendment, and then proceeds to restrict the Second Amendment in a series of proposed executive actions. That is not the kind of leadership that America not only expects or needs. And so let's go to real implications and implications nationally. You mentioned something, I'll get to ammunition in a moment, but let's go to the heart of it. The reason that the founders put the Second Amendment in was to protect all of the other amendments. So the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of travel, assembly, for grievance, freedom of worship, or the Fourth Amendment, which allows you to be free of unreasonable searches and seizures, to be treated fairly in the pre-trial environment. The Sixth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, which then causes you to be treated fairly in the post-arrest environment. The 10th Amendment, which leaves rights to states. All of those mean nothing if the Second Amendment doesn't remain untrammeled. The Second Amendment is not only so that you, Rebecca, can protect your family and I can protect my family, and not only so that we can feel secure in our homes and in our safety, but so that we can feel secure against an overreaching, overpowered, over-centralized government. And, you know, one of the most remarkable things, and you can find it online if you look, is that Mahatma Gandhi, the man who led India with this notion of peaceful protest and that, you know, we didn't want any violence. Mahatma Gandhi, one of the remarkable quotes is that he says one of the most dangerous and damaging things that the British people did to the Indian people is confiscate their firearms, because that takes all the power away from the individual, away from the people. And sovereignty is not something that comes because powerful people say a government ought to exist. No, it comes from the people. The sovereignty belongs to the people. The notion that I have power and I'm going to give it to a government in order to, with all of us by consent, to be able to make some reasonable laws and keep order so that I get my freedom and your neighbor gets your freedom, that is all about the consent of the governed. And the consent of the governed is only made real when they have the ability to protect themselves against an overreaching government. And I am concerned because not only are you seeing overreaching here in the Second Amendment, you're seeing it in a whole bunch of areas. What do they want to do? They want to pass an unconstitutional law with this president's support, taking away your guns, and then pack the Supreme Court with an extra 4 justices so they'll reach the conclusion that that unconstitutional law is constitutional, which it isn't.
Yeah. And folks need to remember history here too, Bobby. The whole reason, in my view, and I've watched a lot and read a lot, was that British troops came into America, or they were here in America, essentially, right, at Lexington and Concord, and said, "Give us your guns, lay them down, surrender your guns," and we didn't. And folks need to be reminded of why the Second Amendment was put there in the first place. And it is about you, the individual, protecting your individual rights. Sometimes people are confused. They think it's more about military folks. But this speaks to us as individuals. And these are very, very serious times, Bobby. And it's important that people understand what's happening. It's important that we continue to defend our rights. AMAC will be defending your rights. We'll be keeping you apprised. We'll be as new bills passed or new bills are introduced. AMAC will be really following the issue, and we will be making sure that everyone has access to any developments in that area. But it's more important than people understand. We've got to vote the right people in. 2022, I pray that people wake up and they understand that so many bad policies we're seeing come out of the left. So many. As you said, they want to pack the Supreme Court. They want to declare America racist. America is not a racist nation. We've got issues of racism, and we've got to fix that. They want to rewrite history. They want to ban voter ID in this country. We spoke about defunding the police. All of these policies are so bad for America. And if we see things continue to go in this direction, it will get worse. So I hope and pray that 2022 brings a lot of change, good change to America, and that we're able, thank God for our over 2 million members, because when we go to Washington, Bobby, and we talk about the number of people that are in support of what we're looking to do, and that is to protect your Second Amendment right, as an example, we do have an audience that listens. So I want to encourage people, if you haven't joined or renewed your AMAC membership, to please do that. And tell friends and family. For $16, you get the bi-monthly magazine, access to steep discounts and benefits. But it allows us to really go to work and work for you, to roll up our sleeves and to do the things that we know that it's hard to do on your own. So AMAC is your resource. Just want to remind people of that.
Maybe, Rebecca, too, I should sort of put a footnote on what you just said, so
Please
that
do.
people understand that AMAC is an optimistic organization. Look, we'll speak realism. We'll tell you what's really happening. But we also, I think, there was an article in the most recent magazine about being the happy warrior. And it really is a deeply rooted idea that if you know in your heart that you're on the right side of history, if you know in your heart that you're doing the right thing and that you're affiliated with good people also trying to do the right thing, at the end of the day, you can sleep well. The world is never going to be completely settled, but at the end of the day, you can know that you're part of a group that's really trying to get good things to happen and more to happen than to not happen. And so, I'll just end with it, in my sort of venue, the idea that leadership matters, right? So leadership matters. We can pick good leaders in 2022 and 2024. We can actually affiliate ourselves with the thoughts and the direction of good leaders now. In every crisis time in the history of this country and in the history of most countries, we have had to lean back, look around, and find good leaders. That also means that good leaders, or if you know you're a good leader, you have an obligation to step up to the extent you can. That might mean going to the school board. It might mean going to the state legislature. It might mean, but being a leader has two different elements to it. One is that you can be a leader in your own life, and you can go out there, set the example, and make good things happen, and make people realize that the future is what you make it. And at the national level, and the state level, we can pick good leaders so that they are in sync with us and we don't lose that connectivity. And the last thing I'll just say is that leadership at the end of the day is all about people. And I have had the good fortune, and you have had the good fortune, Rebecca, I know, in your life experience to starting with your father, but as I have also benefited from his guidance over time. But good leaders are really what it's all about. And good leadership comes down to caring about principles and caring about people. And I'll just tell you, one of the people doubt or worry a little about whether good leaders can still be found. I worked with Colin Powell, and one of the most remarkable things, I'll give you two short vignettes about him because they're just riveting in their own right. One was that one time when one of our children was young, we were out picking apples. I was working for Powell as an assistant secretary. But we never talked about that really at home. We just went and picked apples because that was the time of the season. And my daughter, who was about 3, picked a bag of these apples and said, "I want to give these to Colin Powell." So we laughed. We thought that was very funny. That how did a 3-year-old remember anything about any of that? But dutifully, I went in that next day and gave Secretary Powell these apples. Of course, that's what a dad does. And I thought nothing more of it. That night around 10 o'clock, I'm doing my job and he's at the other end of the hall. And John, a friend, someone who worked with the secretary, comes around the corner with an envelope with my daughter's name on it. And that weekend we open it up, and in big handwriting from Colin Powell has my daughter's name, and "Thank you very much for those apples. I really appreciate apples. Your friend, Colin Powell." Now, let me tell you something. That is leadership. That is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. That is the Secretary of State. That's a guy who did that 10,000 times if he did it once.
Yeah.
And the second example, which is similar, is that we care a great deal, or we should care a great deal, about not only the future of the country, but about those we can influence with our good thinking in a day-to-day way. And the other example I'll give you, again, comes from Colin Powell, who again had multiple tours in Vietnam long before he became a political actor, a real patriot, never used the word racism in my presence ever. Completely no excuses, get it done, believe in the future, believe in people. One time someone came into my office who worked in a different building from around the city. State Department had people in buildings all over the city. And she came in and she looked a little bemused. And I said, "So what is it today?" We were going to talk about an issue tied to policy. She said, "Something funny just happened. And I have to tell you," she said, "when Colin Powell first got here as a Secretary of State, he wandered all of the buildings in town that had State Department people in them, and he introduced himself like a good leader. And we would pour out into the halls and we'd say, 'Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm Jim, and I'm Nancy, and I'm Jane.' And he'd always say, 'What are you working on? And tell me a little about your family.'" She said he must have done that with 1,500, 2,000 people. And she said, "I bumped into him in the hallway on my way up here to your office. And he said, 'Nancy, how are those 3 kids?' And he named my kids."
Wow.
How
Isn't
do
that
people do
great?
that? Leadership.
That is good. It sure is.
Leadership. So
It's
believe in the
caring.
future.
It is caring, and people want to be led. That's another thing. So, if you feel it in your heart, and I guess I don't know who I'm talking to, but anybody who's listening that says, no, I get that, I understand that. If you feel it in your heart to do something, there is a lot that people can do. There's a lot that people can do right here with AMAC. You can become a chapter leader or an AMAC delegate, and we give you a toolbox and all of the step-by-step sort of guideline on how to bring about change right there in your community with AMAC. Gaining and learning and understanding more about what's important to you, and to people who live with you, near you, by you, because we are built on our membership. We take our marching orders from our membership, and so that's why it matters so much. But I love that you bring that up, Bobby. That's a great story. Thank you again for being with us today. I think that's a wrap for today's show. I look forward to having you back with me again, next Wednesday. Each and every Wednesday, we'll be bringing to anyone listening the Reb and Rob Show on truth and history. And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on AMAC's podcast, Better for America, and we look forward to having you back with us again next time.
Thank you for listening to the Better for America podcast. To learn more about AMAC and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.